This morning's scripture is from Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. The word of the Lord.
Praise be to God. And wonderful to be back with you guys after a little bit of a break. Some of you know, but I was away for 2 Sundays, which is always a big undertaking with, a family at home and a church that's very new and in formation. But I'm just so thankful to have had the opportunity to go away. Some of you know that I was on a moose hunt. Yes, that's true. And yes, I did get one, so yay. That would have been a long car ride home, and let me just tell you, if not. 14 hours away in Newfoundland, took time off, and, it's just really good. I mentioned this in the first service this morning, but I want to just say it again, because we wouldn't have been able to do that. As I mentioned earlier, as a new church in formation, if you will, as a church that is still trying to figure out its footing and figure out its rhythms, it felt really good to be able to go away knowing that we have such an excellent, great team here that everything went great. And I heard great reports, and that's largely to do with the people that God has brought our way, and I'm very thankful. I don't take that for granted, and I've been thinking about it a lot this week even, just what resources God has provided for our church in such a short amount of time. So I want to thank our team. I want to thank Jeff Ebert, who, if you were here, was on loan to us for a couple weeks and really, I believe, made a deposit into the life of our church here. And so I'm thankful to Jeff and Elm City Church, where he and his wife Donna have landed. We're just thankful for all the resources that we have available to come and to take part in what we're doing here. If you've been here since the fall, you know that we've been in a series called Rhythms. And we started the fall kickoff with this idea, and this whole theme has been built around this one simple but powerful thought. And it is this. I'll remind you of what that thought is. The things that we do repeatedly and in a habit shape who we become. The things that we do repeatedly and in a habit shape who we become. We used an image early on when we kicked off the series of an image of rock that had been carved out. And I shared that our family had gone, this past summer and found this cool little spot in Westmoreland. And there was you could just see that the water had been flowing for a long time. And the rock had been shaped and carved, and it was smooth. You could slide down it without getting hurt. And that was due to rock being formed over time by steady moving water. It did not happen overnight. It did not happen in a week, but it happened drip by drip, day after day. The simple rhythm had changed the landscape over time. And I want to submit to you that that's what spiritual rhythms can do in our lives as followers of Jesus. When we consistently show up to the rhythms that we see throughout Scripture that are good and that Jesus calls us to, things like Scripture itself. We looked at prayer, Sabbath rest. Those are the types of practices that slowly carve out, just like the water carved out the rock. Those are the practices that carve out the character of Jesus in us over time. So today I want to pick back up into our series in rhythms, and we're turning to one of the most essential and maybe potentially the most often overlooked rhythm of all of the rhythms, and that is community. Community. A few years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness an epidemic. right alongside things like obesity and heart disease. You hear about those things maybe more commonly, but they declared that loneliness is now an epidemic in our country. Surveys show that nearly 60% of Americans say they feel lonely on a regular basis. 60%. Among Gen Z, that number jumps from 60% to almost 80%. Here's what's ironic about our situation. We're more connected now than we ever have been. We have hundreds of friends. We have multiple group chats. We have social media. We get constant notifications. We have these little devices that we use, computers in our pocket, and we are more connected than we ever have been at any point in history. But the reality is that fewer than half of us, even in this room, will say that you even have just one person that you would feel comfortable calling in the middle of the night if something were to go wrong. And not only is that heartbreaking, but it's not how God designed us to live. See, from the very beginning, before sin even entered into the picture, God said, before all that, it is not good for man to be alone. It is not good. And so I want to look today at the rhythm, at our value for community as related to the life of a Jesus follower. And I want to see a few things about community. The first thing that I want us to look at is that community is not optional for Jesus followers. I'll say that again. Community is not optional for Jesus followers. Community isn't just a nice addition to the Christian life, but I would argue that it's at the very heart of what it means to be a human and what it means subsequently to follow Jesus. Acts chapter 2, where we've kind of been planted today, and our text will be for this week and next week the same passage. But Acts chapter 2, verse 42 says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers." I want you to notice the word with me this morning, devoted. What do you think about when you think about the word devoted? The early church showed us that they were intentionally practicing a shared life with God and with one another and with the community. And what was the result of that? What was the result of their devotion? Well, if you skip down to verse 44 and verse 46, it says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. The reality is that we are formed into the image of Jesus, and what we see in their example, in part by the community of Jesus. You and I are formed into the image of Jesus in the community of Jesus. And what I've come to believe in my, 35 years of following Jesus at this point, what I've come to see and believe even more strongly now than I ever believed before is that it is impossible to live out the Christian life in the way that Jesus determined it to happen without an identified community of believers, because that's how Jesus set it up to work. That's how he designed it to function. We can't actually follow Jesus in obedience unless we have the community that we see being described in a passage like Acts chapter 2 that resembles authentic life-on-life community with one another. In our current day and age, every single advertisement that you get, every single notification, every single sort of life marketing tool is designed to make you feel like you as a person, you as an individual, are the center of the universe. And let me just say that in the time when the earliest followers of Jesus had just experienced Jesus' life, and now they are gathering, they're organizing themselves in specific and intentional ways, they know nothing about a 21st century self promoting self-focused life, because everything that they did was in community. The way they actually lived out their faith was in the community. They couldn't do many of the things that they knew to be true about the way of Jesus without having that identifiable group of people that they were doing life with and serving Jesus alongside with. Let me just tell you, I meet so many people these days in our current day and age, and it breaks my heart, because there's a narrative out there that right now that is strong among modern people that says that they can do the Christian life without the church, to which I highly disagree. And here's why. I, as a church person, am fully aware of all the hang-ups and the hurts that go along with the local church. Can we just acknowledge that for a second? Broken people and hurt people hurt people. And here's the good news. You are a person, a flawed individual, and so am I. And so we are like kind of letting each other off the hook right now a little bit, right? Okay? We are broken, flawed, and hurt individuals. And when we are not healthy, that can bring conflict, and that can bring division. And maybe here today you are here, but you're just sort of dipping your toe in the water, and you're not quite sure about church and organized religion. To which I say you should see disorganized religion. It looks a lot worse. Lone Range Christianity, it's become a really big thing. There's books that are being written about this. Why I stopped going to church. Jesus and the early church know nothing about that concept. In fact, some of you might be familiar with this. I've used this before as a way to point to the value and the benefit of the church and the non-option of the church. Is that, if you look in the New Testament, there are 59, count them up, 59 one another commands. They are commands. They are given in the New Testament, and a majority of these commands given by Jesus and in other places can only be followed or obeyed unless you had an identifiable community in which to live them out. In other words, we actually can't fully be obedient to the way of Jesus without having that local, identifiable church, people who are looking to follow the way of Jesus together, because we can't live out the one another commands unless we have these people in this community. And so biblically speaking, today, there's no intentional spiritual formation apart from the local faith community. And that is not my idea. That is Jesus's idea. Jesus gave of himself for the church, with all of its hurts and all of its hang-ups, all of its flaws and all of its failures. And there are many. He died for it. And the community of faith is not negotiable for the Jesus follower. If you want to continue to grow in your faith, you cannot continue to grow in your faith unless you have people who are identified and are in community with you. The second thing when it comes to community is having friends is not the same thing as having community. I'm going to say that again. Having friends is not the same thing as having community. What do I mean? Well, I touched on this before, but I again want to just highlight that it is easier than ever for us to feel like we are connected. We feel like we are connected to all kinds of people because we live in an age where almost everyone would say, yeah, I mean, of course, I have friends, some Facebook friends, some Instagram people, I've got a crew. We get, text messages from people. People keep us on speed dial. We have people that we grab coffee with. Maybe we have people that we do common interests with and hobbies with. But here's the truth. You can have a full social calendar and still feel spiritually alone. You can have all kinds of friends that connect with you and still feel spiritually dry and alone. And that's because friendship and community are not the same thing. Wouldn't it be amazing if deep, authentic community also had people in it that were your friends? Wouldn't that be awesome, right? You might have that, and I hope you do. And as our church continues to grow and develop and expand, I pray for more of that to happen. I love it when people are getting together outside of this gathering. I love it when people are getting together outside of even just like a life group, because even our life groups are smaller communities of people where we practice the way of Jesus together, where we're in each other's lives intentionally, but that's a community formation. But I love to see when relationships are even formed out of those and go beyond just the group time. Friendship often revolves around affinity, generally speaking. Shared interests, similar life stages, people who make us feel comfortable. But community often revolves around formation, people who help you to become more like Jesus. One makes life more enjoyable, and the other makes life more transformational. I like how Sherry Turkle describes it. She said, communities are constituted by physical proximity, shared concerns, real consequences, and common responsibilities. As she thought about the different aspects that make a community what it is, these are the things she came up with. And there's a lot there. There's a lot to that. Some of what we're going to look at next week is the price tag, if you will, when it comes to finding authentic, true community. It is not without a cost. There are oftentimes things that have to happen in order for you to get there. There are oftentimes the feelings of wanting community without actually making the intention or the commitment to actually get what it takes to get real, authentic community. So stick around. Next week, we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But Jesus did not invite us, as a reminder this morning, to be just in our circle of comfort when it comes to community. He invited us into a community where we will be shaped, just like that rock, over time. Here's the key. A people that walk towards him, even when it's messy, and even when it costs us something, is what he desires for you and me. I want to ask you today this question. And if you've never really thought about this before, maybe here's an opportunity. Who actually knows you? I don't just mean like knows who you are. But who here could think of the person in your life that truly knows you? Who isn't afraid to ask you the hard questions? You know what I mean, right? Like the hard questions, the questions that make you a little uncomfortable and maybe make you squirm a little bit because the person cares more about your soul than they do about your comfort. Who are those people in your life? Who's there when things are falling apart around you, not just when things are fun and exciting and shareable? Who are those people? And here's what I would say today. If you're having a hard time naming those types of people in your life, then I might just submit to you that you might have friends, but you don't yet have an authentic community. And here we are on a journey to figure out what that looks like together. And this is what the early church understood. It's what our world and what you and I are starving for. Deep, authentic community. Next week, as I said, we'll spend more of our time looking at what it actually takes to build the kind of community that Jesus has already modeled for us. And it does take some things to get that. You can't just get the reward benefit without the cost, if you will. There is a cost. There is a price tag for authentic community. We're going to talk about that next week. I hope you'll come back. The rhythms that we've been talking about in this series, scripture, prayer, Sabbath, and now community, they aren't just a spiritual checklist for us. This is not a tally of like, okay, I've done this, I did my thing, I'm moving on. These are not just spiritual checklists, these rhythms, these patterns. They're just what I said, patterns. They're patterns of grace. They're actually gifts that have been given to you and me if we'll see it that way. If we'll see what's available to us. They're the steady flow of living water that carves out that likeness of Jesus in us over time, drip by drip by drip. And here's the key, something that I want to make sure that we get this morning. The carving that happens and can happen in your life as you submit yourself to the ways of Jesus in a pattern and in a process. That carving does not happen on its own, in isolation. See, again, we're programmed to think, what do I need to do? Just give me the 1, 2, 3. Tell me what I need to do. We often think about like the quadrants in our life, even like, am I healthy emotionally? Am I healthy physically? Am I healthy, mentally? Am I healthy spiritually? We kind of like compartmentalize our life. And oftentimes we start to look at it as a checklist of things we got to do in order to maintain those levels of health. Rather than spiritual checklists today, a solo project between you and God, God has chosen to use people to shape people. People are part of God's plan to shape people. It was in this kind of community that the Spirit of God moved powerfully. If you joined us, or if you've been here for any amount of time, you might remember that our first series, we went through a book of the Bible. We went through the book of Acts together. And what a great journey we took. We didn't even make it all the way because it was just so much good stuff in there, and just kind of ran out of time before the fall here. But we've been encouraging people to go back to that book, and you can go back online, and all of our messages live on there, and you can go back and journey with us through there on a podcast or wherever you get your media. But one of the things that stands out in the book of Acts is that God moved powerfully in that time. He changed the world through that early crew of people. But you know what's so interesting? Something I never thought about much, or never really gave it as much credence as it deserves, is that God moved powerfully, but he actually moved powerfully in groups of people. Groups of people were what ended up changing and shaping the world. God took 12 ragtag people, his followers, his disciples, and they turned the world upside down. Groups of people are at the core of what Jesus is using to change where we are. God is using us to be a force of change in the river valley. He wants to use us. But you're the people. It's not a solo project. We are looking to build the type of community that we see among the people of Acts chapter 2. Luke says this in the gospel. Luke, awe came upon every soul, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. You see, what drew people to Jesus in the first century wasn't a slick marketing campaign or a shiny strategy. It wasn't an attraction-based model. It was a community that lived like family. And you know what? When the first century pagan world looked upon the community of the church in a time where all kinds of crazy things were going on, they looked at the church community and they said, wow, the way they treat the poor is different. The way that they relate to things like sexuality is different than what we understand. The way that they take care of the needy and women and children, the way that they elevate women in the first century world, that's different. Who is this church? What is this way of Jesus? Wouldn't it be amazing if we, as an authentic community growing and building here at River Valley Church, had the same effect on our culture? That people could look in and say, what is going on with this new community in town? What is going on with this church? I want to know. It wasn't just people who attended church that God used to change the world. It's when people realized that they were the church. That's when he began to move and to use them. What drew people to Jesus in the first century wasn't flashy, lights and fog, an amazing worship team, big budget and ministry programs that meet the needs of everybody from birth to death. It was the way of Jesus authentically being lived out in a community of people that were family. That's what changed the world. So let's do the same thing. Let's do the same thing. Let's begin to build something together that resembles what we see in Acts. This is God's plan for us. So here's my invitation to you this week. Don't just be around the community. I want to ask you to help us build it. I want you to help us build it. This is a perfect time to get in at the ground level of what it looks like to be part of building something. I want you to help. Don't just attend something. We have long tried to get rid of this motif that I'm going to church. Do you know that this is just a building? It's a beautiful building, and it's a building that was generously gifted to our community to use for kingdom purposes, but this is just brick and mortar. The church of Jesus Christ has flesh and blood on it. Don't just attend a service. Anybody can do that. Don't just attend, but invest. Invest in someone, in someone's life. Maybe that means inviting another couple or a family or a person over for dinner. Maybe it means joining a life group or being part of smaller communities of people that are trying to authentically live out the way of Jesus together. Maybe it's finally having that honest conversation with the person that you've been avoiding. Whatever it is, I want you to take one intentional step this week towards being known and knowing others. Because the rhythms that form us deeply always happen together. Practicing the way of Jesus together.